You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we obviously have some bombshell news today wherein Donald Trump's September 18th sentencing was pushed until after the election. So I want to start off a little bit in an unorthodox way here. There's actually a silver lining that you brought up that might signal some bad news for Trump, even though he seems to, on its face, have gotten away with more unaccountability yet again. Can you speak on what that silver lining might be?
Yeah, Brian, because we saw this one coming a mile away, we talked about how we thought Judge Merchan may continue the sentencing until after the election. But the first thing that came to mind when I saw this legal development was it actually will give Judge Merchan the unfettered ability to impose the sentence he believes is appropriate for Donald Trump's 34 felony convictions, which in anybody's book is a period of incarceration. I actually think it would have been very difficult for Judge Merchan to impose a period of incarceration on the Republican nominee for the presidency who was fast approaching a national election. He could have done it, but talk about an enormously weighty decision. Now, when he sentences Donald Trump on November 27th, Donald Trump will be neither a candidate nor will he have been elected, I'm confident, if we all do our jobs and get out to vote. He will not be a candidate. He will not be the president-elect. He'll just be a plain old citizen who's been convicted of 34 felonies to try to cheat in an earlier presidential election. I think Judge Merchan will feel unburdened by the enormous pressure of sentencing citizen Trump the way he would have felt if he was sentencing candidate Trump. So this could be a blessing in disguise.
Glenn, is there anything we can read from the tea leaves here? Because in the sense that, let's say Judge Merchan was going to go for probation, for example, or some deferred sentence or whatever it was, if it was going to be light, then wouldn't logic suggest that he would be okay sentencing him in the next couple of weeks? But now the fact that he doesn't want this to be impacted by the upcoming election, does that suggest that there might be a weightier sentence in the works?
I like the way you think, Brian. Logic may suggest that, but let me read one sentence that I thought was powerful and poignant in Judge Merchan's 3.5-page letter that he issued announcing this decision to continue Donald Trump's sentence until November 27th. Here's what he said. Adjourning this decision on sentencing should dispel any suggestion that the court will have issued any decision or imposed any sentence either to give an advantage to or to create a disadvantage for any political party and or candidate for any office. What is he saying there? And, I can't say that I thought of it in exactly these terms before I read that well-crafted sentence by Judge Merchan. When he handed down a sentence, regardless of what that sentence was, it would, in a very real and concrete way, give an advantage to one candidate and a disadvantage potentially to the other. And that was a box from which Judge Merchan could not escape. Whether it was probation or a suspended sentence or a lengthy period of incarceration, he would in fact be giving an advantage to a candidate and a disadvantage to a candidate. And he said, I don't want to do that, and that's why the better course of wisdom right here is to push it until after the election.
Glenn, what do you make of the fact that just one day earlier, we heard from Judge Chutkan, who said, and this is a quote, "This court is not concerned with the electoral schedule." So she expressly said that she wasn't concerned with the fact that there was an election upcoming, that her priority here, which I believe rightly, is that she has to continue moving forward with the prosecution of somebody who was indicted on 4 separate felony counts. And so what do you make of the fact that she came out and said that, which is the polar opposite of what Judge Merchan here said, which is that his decision is expressly being impacted by the fact that there's an election coming up in a few weeks?
Yeah, it's a great observation. It feels like there's an inconsistency there, but I'm going to try to tamp down the notion that there's an actual inconsistency. What Judge Chutkan is doing is precisely what the Supreme Court directed her to do. She has no choice. She was told, you will promptly litigate and resolve the presidential immunity issue, and then the case will inevitably go back to the Supreme Court. She's not making any judgment about Donald Trump's guilt or innocence. She's not making any judgment about what sentence might be appropriate, what punishment might be appropriate in the event of conviction. She is, in an orderly way, as she would with any litigant before her, just sawing the wood, the legal wood that the Supreme Court has presented her. And what she said was, I'm not going to take into account the election as I go through this motion's schedule that I'm going to be plowing through for the next few months. I feel the bit of friction between what she said and what Judge Merchan said as I just read it. I don't think it's a true inconsistency. I think they are both honoring their respective duties as judges while being sensitive to the realities of, where we are at this moment in America.
Glenn, where do you stand on the fact, notwithstanding what Judge Chutkan has said and how it relates to what Judge Merchan is saying, where do you stand on the fact that Judge Merchan did opt to forego sentencing until after the election? Because the way that I see it, I think is the way that most people are going to view this, which is that this guy keeps getting away with this, all the while decrying this purported weaponization of government or witch hunts or election interference, when the only person actually being conferred extra benefit is the guy who was convicted 6 months ago now and still hasn't faced any accountability, any sentencing for his crimes.
Brian, you're getting me whipped up here because, you and I have been talking about this for a long time. And what have we, I think, landed on before today? That we hope Judge Merchan proceeds to sentencing, but it wouldn't surprise us at all if he didn't. And we talked about the many reasons why we believe that. And I still think, that was probably prophetic. I think we got this one right. What do they say? Even a blind mouse bumps into a piece of cheese every now and then. So I think I got this one right. Yeah. But before answering your question directly, how do I feel about it? Let me talk about how I think the left and the right will perceive it. The left will perceive it exactly as you are articulated, right? He's gotten away with it again. Are you kidding me? Any other litigant would be sentenced on his sentencing date without regard to that litigant's running for office or having job responsibilities or family responsibilities. Nobody else gets those kind of, benefits, that gets that kind of preferential and deferential treatment. That's the way many people will see it. You know what the people on the right are going to see? And I was wincing when this came to mind after I read the new reporting. They're going to say, you see, Judge Merchan said it would be unfair, it would be inappropriate, and it would be election interference if the case were to proceed to sentencing. So you know what that tells everybody? That Judge Chutkan is dirty. She's doing wrong. She should stop just the way Judge Merchan stopped. But you know what, Brian, this is the age we live in where there's this enormous divide that I think we're going to have to work every day to pull closer and closer and closer together, assuming the election goes the right way for our democracy and for our opportunity to bridge that divide. How do I feel about it personally? I actually applaud Judge Merchan. I applaud him because the more I sat with the notion that no matter what he did, sentencing with the possibility of imprisonment is so weighty and consequential that it will advantage and disadvantage political candidates in the presidential race. And even though he would have been well within his rights and his judicial discretion to proceed to sentencing, I applaud him for making what I think was actually a brave decision. And I know, Brian, there are going to be lots of folks who disagree with that position, but that's where I land.
No, I mean, look, I think at first glance, it is hard for me to square this idea that Donald Trump doesn't keep just getting away with it. But I think that if Judge Merchan knows that a prison term, for example, would be too hard, too difficult a decision to hand down in the lead up to an election, that it works both ways. The logic works both ways, which means that if and when Donald Trump loses in November, it will be that much easier for Judge Merchan to then hand down a prison sentence, because we already know that the fact that he's running to be president weighs heavily on him. So by that same logic, it goes to, suggest that if he's no longer running for president, then he will have carte blanche. He'll have a clear runway to then impose an appropriate and just prison sentence, which is, again, what Donald Trump deserves.
Yeah, so the argument that Judge Merchan, had he gone to sentencing, the argument that, well, he imposed the sentence he did because he was trying to impact the election and hurt Donald Trump. Well, after the election is over, nobody can legitimately make that argument or observation. Let me just add this one thing, Brian. I can't help but notice that this decision by Judge Merchan came immediately after Judge Chutkan set a briefing schedule in the D.C. election subversion case that involves her taking on the issue of what acts of Donald Trump are official acts and might be worthy of immunity and what acts are not official acts. And I can't help but think, I read the letter from Judge Merchan twice to see if I missed something. I can't help but think, you know what? Judge Merchan said a federal judge is about to take up this maiden voyage to try to unravel and apply this presidential immunity official doctrine nonsense that the Supreme Court handed down. If I were a state court judge who didn't deal with federal law every day, I would be much more comfortable making those decisions, which Judge Merchan still has to make in a pending motion, after I saw how a federal court judge who the Supreme Court told to litigate that issue, resolve it, and make those rulings actually ruled. That had to also impact, at least in part, Judge Merchan's thinking.
All right. Well, again, all of this underscores the fact that, in this upcoming election, Donald Trump will have the first jury to determine what his sentence is going to be, and that's going to be us on November 5th. The only way that he gets to sentencing in the end of November is going to be if he loses this presidential election. And so Glenn and I have said this before, and we'll repeat it now. And the fact is that it is not up to the courts, it's not up to the judges, it's not up to prosecutors or lawyers to save us. It's up to the American people to turn out in numbers that are just, to use a quote from Glenn himself, in numbers too big to rig, too real to steal. And that will clear the runway to get some actual accountability for Donald Trump at the end of November at the hands of Judge Merchan, and then hopefully at the hands of Judge Chutkan, Judge McAfee in Georgia, and of course whatever new judge is handed this case down in Florida. So with that said, a lot to stay on top of as we continue to move this process forward. For those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.